Okay, so hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining the first webinar of the Marine Traffic Marine Analytics Conference, with today's session focusing on the breadth of AIS usage and the importance of AIS to international shipping and supply chains. Firstly, I'd like to welcome and introduce today's panelists, starting with our very own Head of Data, Stelios Stratidakis, who's joined by Robert Taylor Branco, Senior Account Manager at Vessel Tracker, Mark Deverell, Head of Data Operations at Spire, and Andrew Loretta, Maritime Business Development at Orbcom. So a very big thank you to all of you for joining and bringing your expertise to the session. Before we start, just a quick bit of housekeeping for the session. If you'd like to use the chat function throughout the webinar, please do so. If anyone has any questions, please write them in the Q&A box. As time permitting, hopefully we'll be able to select a couple of questions to ask at the end of the session. So to kick it off in the best way possible, I thought it might be useful to propose a quick poll to everyone to help facilitate the discussions we'll be having. So you should be able to see the poll now. We'll give about 30 seconds to answer the question, and then we'll go through the answers. Give it another 10 seconds or so. Okay, so we should be able to close the poll. Thank you so much for everyone who answered. So in terms of results, interesting. So that's quite a mixed result, actually, and a very good segue into the first question, which I will direct to Stelios. What would you say are the main effects AIS has had on safety, transparency, and overall decision-making within the maritime industry, Stelios?
First of all, hello everyone, and thanks to our fellow panelists for joining and to this really global audience I'm seeing in the chat. Okay, so I think this needs a bit of storytelling about the protocol itself, first of all. So as many of us and the people here might know, the AIS protocol has been primarily introduced in the early 2000s by the IMO as a means to enhance safety at sea. So it was its primary, let's say, aim, becoming mandatory for commercial and passenger vessels. Of course, over the years, it fast developed into a global awareness tool. And I think this was made possible due to its open nature. AIS is free waves in specific frequencies. Now, as the coastal networks of AIS receiving stations have been growing together with the capabilities from space tracking, additional applications of the protocol have been made possible. These factors combined with the rise of technology and digitalization has really enabled to move from data to information to intelligence. Now, from a services provider point of view, in the early days, it was all about putting dots on maps to showcase where vessels are. But the combination of the factors mentioned before, I think, enabled faster processing and archiving. And, as with many things in life, knowledge of the past helps with understanding and inferring what might happen in the future. Nowadays, about 1 billion AIS messages get processed on a daily basis, and these data are continuously fused with other datasets and information sources to generate additional value. And At this point, I would really also like to point out how the shipping industry itself has been adopting data solutions over time, moving from what started as potentially a minor disruption to now becoming a reliable toolbox of high quality on a global scale. Something, the quality part that I think that all of us here in this panel are striving to achieve through better understanding of the data. But this interplay with the industry also facilitated the further understanding of real challenges in the real world and ways that real data can be of service. So this customer-centric approach and this knowledge exchange paved the way for a wide array of applications based on AIS, ranging obviously from real-time voyage monitoring and fleet optimization to asset management, asset maintenance, planning of services and optimization of resources to business process automation, but also a standard level way of ships and ports, shores to an interface for these stakeholders, not to mention regulatory compliance, monitoring, and of course, sustainability goals and ways to minimize carbon footprint in the maritime sector. So to sum up, all of these factors above, together with understanding the macro level and the trends in the industry, form the, let's say, the maritime analytics landscape where AIS is at the heart, supporting safety and also enabling visibility, transparency and predictability on what happens in the oceans, which at the end of the day leads to this decision support intelligence. Danny.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Stelios. Any thoughts from the rest of the panel on what Stelios has said?
Yeah, just in one area of the question about transparency, I think the obvious thing that AIS added in terms of just pure safety, which is obviously its initial purpose as a safety protocol, is that it's added transparency around incidents that occur. You know, and it's been used very heavily as a tool of analysis around any maritime collisions that have occurred since AIS became, you know, the standard for tracking, and it's very much opened up an area which was closed before. You know, there was no visibility of anybody onto anything that happened unless you had, you know, the radar, or you had visual observation of an incident. Whereas now there's data behind these incidents as well. I mean, it amazes me that collisions still occur, you know, primarily down to human error, but down to human error in not observing the AIS information that can happen. We've seen that with collisions in Singapore. But things like the Costa Concordia event, you know, will be 10 years back now, was the first big event I remember being really analysed by AIS, where we all had visibility on it, and marine traffic and Ofcom and people had the AIS data to show you what happened and to pull out the trends and to show you how stupid the decisions that had been taken were in comparison to the normal behaviour. And it's really opened up, just in the safety kind of then incident analysis arena, a whole new opportunity to analyse and look deep and to question decisions and to hold people accountable. You know, just in safety decisions as well as in other operational areas. That's my bit.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I would just add to what Mark was saying is that, you know, in terms of that transparency and visibility, there's it's very interesting how AIS and the uses have evolved, right? Because AIS is a public broadcast system, and normal operations would say that if you are if you are supposed to be operating it, then if you're not, then what's going on, right? And so I think, you know, what's happened is that AIS is kind of identifying the good guys or the good behavior, and there's a lot of other sensors and data now that can be used against AIS to kind of identify nefarious behavior or, you know, dark vessels. And so it's interesting that as AIS has been accepted and been used there are people that know they're being watched and maybe they turn it off, but now we've developed other ways of kind of identifying if they turned it off or maybe they're doing something else. So it's become kind of a background check as well, as a tool.
Absolutely. To back up what Andrew's saying on the dark vessels, it's become a standard now that you expect AIS to be transmitted and to be seen. And when you're not seeing that, it's now a flag that maybe something nefarious going on, which is a complete turnaround from when AIS was launched. And there was a lot of suspicion about having this data open and available. And there was a strong movement to a degree against having the data shared. Whereas now we've seen so many benefits from it that it's become more the standard that it should be shared and should be available. And when you're not seeing it, then a question is being asked, which is a complete turnaround from how things were originally.
Yeah. I mean, you can even use the AIS itself to check if AIS is turned off, right? You can look at signals from other vessels within the same vicinity to see if they're of similar age of a vessel that's not transmitting signals, to get a much better idea as to see whether or not AIS is on or off. So it even becomes an own sort of self-checking device in that sense as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that we have to point out that, all this leads to further ways of AIS becoming, let's say, a standard, as mentioned by everyone, and a mainstream way to understand what's going on out there. And also further developing applications that pave the road for more and more visibility and transparency. I think this is a one-way road.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I guess there's a follow-up question to that, Robert. Mark mentioned, I guess, that the concerns, historic concerns around data being shared. How do you feel AIS has facilitated and enabled stability within the industry?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for that question. And thanks, Stelios, for setting the scene there. I'm going to go back to a key word that Stelios said here, and that's transparency. Is the key element here to creating stability within the industry. I mean, transparency in shipping, as within any market, provides a foundation for best practice, monitoring compliance to legislation, regulation, etc. It also provides a pragmatic approach to operations, and it also ensures that market fluctuation is more based on actual market factors such as supply and demand, as opposed to the market easily being manipulated to, a few key players that operate within the market. Mm-hmm. If you look at the world of shipping, obviously traditionally it's been a world that we've had very little insight into. It's a global market, so it's been very difficult to gain insight into it. It's also been out on the sea. AIS, being into the operations of a vessel, we never had much insight into what was going on with the vessel. We never had much insight into vessel availability, into the supply chain in general, into the supply and demand of the goods and commodities being shipped around the globe. And transparency has really remained quite a conundrum within the industry. And even to an extent where, the world of shipping, often companies within shipping were often profiting from that lack of transparency, right? And in a lot of cases, their strategy was based on the lack of transparency in the market. This obviously, this is obviously very limited to a small group of companies who are able to take advantage of the lack of transparency. It really doesn't encourage things like best practice within the industry. It also means it's extremely difficult to monitor regulation compliance, regulation to compliance. Compliance to regulation. It also means, key players within the market are able to manipulate the market much easier, meaning, at minimum, the market was not as stable as it could have been. AIS data has really provided a platform to turn all of that around. AIS data has been, we've been providing some level of transparency into the world of shipping for at least 20 years. With the addition of satellites, we're providing global transparency and insight into shipping for at least 10 years, which means we can now take a much more pragmatic approach on the application of data, of knowledge gathered over time to shipping, and this on a global scale as well. It's enabling us to be more adaptable and reactive to market conditions, as well as legislation, which is something the industry has never been known for. some of the first use cases, I guess, sort of ability were very simple. You are able to sort of assess average speed of a vessel over a voyage relative to fuel consumption. You could use AIS data to check vessel availability, meaning things like rates and consumption started to become more stable, or at least be more leveled by supply and demand as opposed to market manipulation. I think AIS data even sort of provides opportunity to startups that, you know, that can help, that can even profit off creating solutions that create stability within the market. AIS data has helped us to, it's helped provide insight that's helped the shipping community adapt and comply to IMO 2020 regulations. We can now easily check the trading history of a vessel as part of the vetting process, which was not easy to do prior to AIS. We can look at fuel consumption data, create baselines, use AIS data then to help monitor and reduce emissions within the industry, which has also helped us to comply to IMO 2020 regulations, but also create a more sustainable and stable industry in general. We're able to use it to create stability and sustainability within fishing by detecting illegal fishing. I think there's even, if we look at a hot topic at the moment, port congestion, that's really affecting the market in light of COVID and creating a lot of market instability. AIS data also really provides us with opportunity to create stability here. Here's a little bit of a plug. I mean, we're currently working on developing AIS-based solutions that provide a measure of port congestion, as well as a tool to predict port congestion and assess voyage costs. I guess once we've been using that over time, that tool can then be used to, you know, to develop or to create the ability to make decisions around how you charter your vessel based on time, based on fuel, based on emissions, based on costs, etc., etc. I mean, there's a bunch of different ways it's created stability in the market. I think, again, the key element there is transparency. I mean, AIS data has provided, I think for the first time, real transparency into shipping, and it looks like it will continue to do so out into the future.
Thank you. Yeah, and I've written down 4 words that you said that I think pretty much sum up the utility and diverse utility of AIS: transparency, adaptability, stability, sustainability. I guess opening it up, Andrew, what would you add?
Yeah, you know, it's leveled the playing field. It's democratized shipping. It's given us insights into information that we previously didn't have. If I just take it from a perspective of, if I go to the store and I don't understand why things aren't on the shelves, and I can go back and see, well, there's a, you know, there's a supply problem. Well, why is there a supply problem? Well, it's because there's a bunch of ships outside of Long Beach, California that can't dock and offload. Okay, well, you know, that sort of information wasn't available only, you know, 10 years ago, the way it is now, or the way it's being processed now. It's when marine traffic started 14 years ago, it was more of a cooperative of you know, people that were looking at vessels, and you kind of opted in, and it was neat to kind of look at dots on a map. But the way that the data has been used and people found the utility in it so quickly in a lot of different applications that we've already just named here is pretty extraordinary when you think about it. And, you know, somebody once, actually probably all know who Guy Thomas is, but he said, you know, I think, you know, AIS is the next great thing since GPS. And initially I was like, well, that's kind of a stretch. But when you think about it and you think about how much we rely on it, it's kind of, you know, it's kind of true. It's really been the big game changer that we've seen in the last 20 years in terms of visibility. And as human beings, we want to know what's around the corner, right? So this has kind of given us that. And we've built, you know, a lot of reliance on it now.
Yeah, if I may add, I think that it is important to also note that we're talking about data and analytics here, which means that all these applications, and I'm sure that as we keep talking, more and more will keep popping up, are measurable, which means that can be tied to the business, let's say, goals, regardless of the specific line of business. And this is why they will keep coming up through this interplay with the industry, with more applications, and the protocol itself keeps evolving. This means that, you know, KPIs tied to business goals can be captured and monitored, and AIS is quite vital in that. And also in terms of the overall stability, and as this digitalization process moves on and the global demand rises as well, it's very important, I think, to note that, okay, AIS is global, but maritime and maritime events are captured everywhere, anywhere in the world, which means that it can serve the needs of specific use cases in specific regions in the world as well, which means, you know, it can shift according to these use cases. And this is, I think, fundamental for stability, especially through volatile times, such as the ones that we have all been experiencing during these past couple of years.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, it really definitely gives us the ability to avoid market manipulation to help create stability. It really gives us the ability to react when you know, market conditions change, which also help to create stability.
I would add on the topic of stability, I mean, stability comes from uncertainty. You know, risk comes from uncertainty, where with the transparency, we now have the stability of reporting of the data. So there's far less uncertainty about what's actually happening now that everything can be tracked like it can through AIS, and that definitely helps bring a general stability through the provision of information. You know, prior to AIS, people knew a ship sailed with a cargo of oil, and they probably knew where it was going to. It had been declared, but maybe they didn't. Maybe the owners only knew, and then they probably wouldn't hear anything again for 10, 15, 20 days, depending on what the voyage was. Whereas now we know everything up front, and we can monitor it throughout the picture, throughout the voyage, and anybody can make decisions as they see the situation changing and conditions changing within a market on a global view. So there's far less uncertainty driving bad decisions on that basis. I mean, there's still scope for it, but it's a lot less reduced than it was prior to that.
Excellent. Very interesting. Thank you so much for that. So before we move on to the next question, and I guess in keeping with the theme of the practical applications of AIS within the industry, I'd like to share a second poll with everyone, if that's okay, and hopefully it should be on your screen. There you go. And I'll give you another 30 seconds and then we can go over that. Thank you. Okay, we'll give it another 10 seconds or so. Perfect. Thank you very much to everyone. I'll share the answers now. Okay, so again, quite the mix. Primarily to monitor vessels' whereabouts performances, which I guess to an extent you would imagine. I guess following up from this, and this is perhaps a question for you, Andrew. Exactly how vital is AIS to international shipping and today's connected supply chains?
Well, I would say that the whole global supply chain has built all of their monitoring, performance, and analytics systems around AIS now. You know, all the top global manufacturers in the world, and not just the top ones, but a lot of them, all ingest AIS data to know where components are, to know where their products are. Whether it's shipping companies, freight forwarders, ports, terminals, they all rely on AIS, and they've built some very sophisticated systems around the data that comes from AIS. And since it's a public broadcast system, it's not proprietary data. it's just kind of been, I think, in some ways taken for granted that it's just always going to be around. And you can build, you know, the greatest analytics platforms around it because it's data now that's very, you know, widely available. So, you know, we probably have kind of underestimated or not appreciated enough how vital AIS is to.
Seem to have lost Andrew there for a second. Hopefully he'll come back. It wouldn't be a live webinar without some kind of technical difficulty. So please bear with us. He will be back. In the meantime, perhaps we open it up, and then when Andrew comes back, we can let him finish. Robert?
So just remind me of the topic we're talking on.
So we're talking around how vital AIS is to international shipping and the connected supply chain.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think as Andy was saying, really using AIS data to monitor what's going on within the supply chain. I think one of the big reasons for that is it's, you know, it is the only truly global data set out there that does provide that sort of insight into the market. So it really gives you not only the option to look into your own shipments, but it also gives you the option to look into your competitors' shipments. It gives you the option to look into the market relative to, say, specific fleets that you're operating within, and look at how you're performing relative to a specific fleet within the market. Yeah, I think it also gives us, you know, it segues into being able to create other applications off the back of that AIS data. So we're able to do things like geofencing, create areas which are known terminals, etc. So we can automate things like arrivals and departures of vessels, create alerts for when things change within the data as well. Does anyone else have anything to add to that? I mean, I think Andy's coming.
It looks like Andrew's back. Hello, we missed you, Andrew.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say that AIS is as vital as having electricity. We lost electricity here momentarily. Sorry about that.
Glad to have you back.
Yeah, so just to reiterate, yeah, I mean, all of these global systems have been built around AIS, and so, to take it away is, I think you understand the vitality of the data.
If I can add, I mean, when you think about supply chain, and it's often been about just-in-time supply, just-in-time scheduling, optimizing your processes and streamlining, and AIS has been key to that. And you think about the amount of cargo that is transported on the water. I mean, 90% of everything is the figure often quoted. It used to be quoted at higher, but aviation's had a little bit of an inroad into the business. But it's still, the majority of cargoes are shipped internationally on water. And all the processes have been streamlined to cut costs, to operate as efficiently as possible, which is where AIS brings a benefit to help that efficiency. And it helps you identify whether that's, you can't do it without that real-time information. If you're looking to schedule the stevedores to be at the port or to meet your cargoes, you need to know with accuracy when the ships are going to arrive and see whether that's on track, and then readjust your plans around that. If you're a pilot looking to meet the ships, you don't want to get in a pilot boat and head out to sea unless you know the ship's going to be there. And you've got radio communication and stuff. But there's a classic example of the marine traffic controllers off Long Beach recently on a podcast said, before they had all the congestion pre-pandemic, vessels were arriving off Long Beach, Los Angeles, within about 30 minutes variation of meeting their pilot and making their slot. And it was incredibly accurate to a large container ship carrying 20,000 containers going from China to the West Coast USA with a slot of 30 minutes. And AIS is a key part to monitoring that and having those operations being able to perform to that level of that efficiency in many, many areas. Not just pilots meeting the ships, but the berthing slots or the provision of services to the ships. It's made an incredible difference to the point where it's now probably commoditized in terms of we expect to have that as a building block to put all these extra efficiencies and applications on top of. And I think AIS has transformed, what you can do in the maritime market and how operations can be managed, the efficiencies you can gain just from having that insight and then building it by fusing it with the other information or planning that you've got.
Yeah, it really does give you the ability to assess where that bottleneck is, right? So we can look at the terminal. Is the bottleneck in the terminal? Is it the available length at quay? Is it the number of pilot vessels? Is it the number of towage vessels, right? How do we adapt to that? Do we need to have more pilotage? Do we need to have more dynamic fleets? You know, are we operating vessels that are too large? Do we need to create new terminals, et cetera, et cetera? So it really helps us to identify where the bottleneck is and then to be creative in our solutions about how we adapt to that.
And just exactly how the more we talk about it, the more applications keep popping up. And, you know, to make it more relatable, I think to the audience as well, it might help to relate it to our own personal habits during these past 2 years. I mean, we order more stuff. There is a change. There's a total shift in the way that supply chains operate. And just imagine, you know, our ability to know where our package, our parcel is. And this is the analogy in the shipping world. And this is, you know, this can be materialized through the AIS. There is no other system out there that can do this. And also, I think that it is also indicative of how shipping is what actually kept this world moving during these times. It was a prime example of the importance. Now, the logistics and manufacturing industries, as mentioned by Andrew, are, I think, leading this change towards the digitalization, but the adoption of digital solutions and AIS-driven application is expanding, and the change is happening. And we notice that in our own lives, and it's happening at scale when cargo is moved. So instead of fighting, I think we better embrace it and think of the next applications.
Yeah, we've kind of created a monster with AI. It's you know, it's so kind of taken for granted, and there's just so many things that have been built around it now. Going back to all of the examples that were mentioned here, and you know, it's kind of hard to think of what it was like before we had this sort of visibility, right?
Oh God, yes, I do remember, but it's hard to go back to it. If I can add to it, so going back to the original question here, it was how vital is AIS to international shipping and today's connected supply chain? I might even dare to consider that it's more vital to the supply chain than it is to international shipping, because of all the additional applications which are monitoring the shipping in real time. You know, once the captain's under control of the vessel on the voyage, he's pretty cool. He's got his voyage plan, he's got his route, he's got his weather information, he's got his instructions. He's not really monitoring the AIS to himself or his competitors. It's people monitoring the market that are making most use of this. It's traders looking at the situation. It's operations applications. It's people looking at efficiencies who are looking at AIS. And I would probably suggest that AIS is more vital to the supply chain and the applications around business management than it is to shipping from that point of view. Like Andrew said, we've created a monster, and the monster's gone off in a completely different direction. But it's a good monster.
It's interesting because I guess one of the we spoke about one of the biggest benefits of AIS is the efficiency that it adds to the industry. Also, in spite of external issues and circumstances that can't be controlled. Going back to you, Mark, how do you feel the pandemic has influenced the demand for maritime analytics?
Interesting. I think the pandemic has influenced the demand for analytics, not just maritime analytics. We've all become data scientists in the last 18 months, right? Even those of us who were before become now familiar with all the data science around COVID, pandemic, spread numbers, R numbers, all this kind of thing, vaccination rates. And it's also tied in very nicely to maritime analytics, because AIS is all about what is happening. You know, which in some ways that's similar to the pandemic. It's all been about monitoring what's happening. And straight away with the pandemic, it had an immediate effect on downturn in global maritime transport and maritime trade. You know, as the pandemic took hold in China before it took hold in Western Europe or the Western nations, we immediately saw a downturn in maritime activity coming out of China. And then when it finally reached the Western shores, we saw a downturn in everything, and people wanted to know what is happening. And then we could tell that from AIS. We were all putting reports out there saying, well, this was the tanker activity last week or last month. This is the tanker activity this month. This was the cruise ship activity. This is the cruise ship activity now. Immediately we could verify what's happening. We give people confidence with the data to back up the reports of saying, yeah, activity is dying, things aren't getting out, things aren't getting in. AIS was able to help verify that. And I think it's helped strengthen the demand for data-driven analytics. It was already a growing trend. And in some ways, Maritime's always been a little bit slow to adapt, but I see a continual growth in demand for Maritime Analytics, starting first with AIS and then fusing other data that we had. And Rob, you mentioned port polygons and somebody else mentioned other data. And we take what we have to create that next level of insight, which helps people understand what's happening in their world they're operating in, and help give them some foresight into the near-term future at least. And I think the pandemic has helped drive that. I can't really put a measure on how much it's helped drive it compared to how much it was a trend anyway of growth. And we're already on an upward growth path, the data analytics, the maritime analytics. But definitely I think it's helped because it's created some new situations which we didn't expect and had to suddenly look into. Nobody would expect tanker activity to drop off kind of 40% in March last year or whatever it did around the US Gulf. Nobody would expect the cruise market to just die. Nobody would expect China to be backlogged as much as it has been at different times during the pandemic. And we needed insights into what's happening. So it brings a level of stability, as we mentioned earlier, in being able to get that view on the maritime world. So I think we've been able to report on these things with confidence, with data-driven insight. And I think that's helped drive and will continue to help drive the demand for maritime analytics as you see what can happen. And the best example of that is probably the ongoing situation in Long Beach, Los Angeles. And Andy mentioned that, and they've had problems ongoing since autumn last year. We're all running stories kind of, I think, October last year when we were really waking up with the fact that Long Beach was getting backed up then, and it's been continuing up and down since. And now that's had ripple effects back in the global supply market. And everybody knows that there's 100 plus vessels anchored off Los Angeles, Long Beach. Everybody knows that there's a global supply chain problem. Everybody's seeing metrics to say, okay, it's not just the West Coast US now, it's also bits of China, it's bits of Europe that are getting bottlenecks. So, there's a vast awareness that's come out of the pandemic-driven situation, which I think has been great for advertising what we can do, and will probably build new businesses going forward as people realize, oh, hey, we can give insight into this or make an advantage, and information is all about finding a business edge to save yourself and make yourself some money. AIS has been doing that with brokers and people in operations for a decade. And now more people are waking up to what can be done because we're making it clear what can be done. And I guess the other example that's happened during the pandemic was, I've gone blank on the name, the ship that blocked the Suez Canal, the Ever Given. It blocked the Suez Canal for nearly a week. That's happened a few times in the past, and AIS has given insight onto that when it's happened in the past. But I don't remember it ever happening for so long. I don't remember it ever happening during a pandemic when we already had supply problems. We already had kind of news about things being delayed and congestion. And so the effect was even more significant this time around. And, we had a level of analytics that was being provided from AIS and monitoring maritime trade that I don't think had ever come out in a single news event before. So it's been a perfect storm, with the pandemic, the ability and how AIS and maritime have been involved in the effects of the pandemic, that really it's kind of been great for showing what we can do and showing people how maritime analytics can go forward.
Yeah, I think that's true. And also looking at that, like the Suez Canal event, it gives us ability to reality check what's going on as well. We had port authorities there telling us, a vessel is going to be out within this number of hours, and we could utilize AIS data to actually confirm what was going on and then look at, the trickle down effects of what that was in other areas and other parts of the market. I think it also helps us, a lot of the solutions we then create and are able to identify and create become translatable to other markets within the market as well. Like if we're looking at what's happening at Long Beach, we create solutions for people to figure out how to operate relative to that trickles down to operations within the dry market, within tanker markets. It enables us to look at port congestion within those markets as well, to cost our voyages better, to choose how we're going to charter our vessels much more appropriately, etc.
Yeah, to connect this with the comments before about the supply chain, it's only hard to imagine what would be the process. It was mentioned the congestion in LA, it was mentioned the Suez, of not knowing what goes on. that would not have been possible. The only relevant source of information would be official sources or port authorities with some level of delay maybe. AIS is real time, and you can always have a look on what's going on and make business decisions based on that, or understand how a major event might unfold. If I may add on the pandemic, I think that in the beginning there was, of course, a lot of uncertainty, and I think that we all experienced that, and some decision-making delays and so on. But on the other hand, and talking about application of AIS, it was a notable trend. I really like what Mark mentioned about all of us becoming more data savvy in the process. And request for analytics and aggregated views. And then this makes total sense because in turbulent times, we're trying to build our understanding, and to build understanding and make decisions, we need information, we need data. And I think this also paved the way for even more applications from non-core shipping companies like financial institutions or governmental bodies and organizations who are trying to build an understanding of how all this might unfold from a supply-demand perspective and so on. On the positive side, I think that, if I can say that about the pandemic, the timing was good in the sense that the process of digitalization was already happening, and eventually everything, all this situation actually accelerated this adoption and coming up with novel solutions and ways to understand what goes on fast.
Yeah, there's also an accountability factor here too. AIS is you're telling, if you're broadcasting AIS, you're telling somebody who you are and where you're going and at what speed, and you're basically making yourself accountable for your actions. And that has led to the accountability in terms of efficiency, showing up when you're supposed to show up, being on time. We sit back and we want to know why things are late. We want to know, what the issue is. In the case of, Long Beach, California, even before there was satellite AIS, you could stand up on the top of the hill and you could look and see that there were 40 or 50 vessels that were at anchor out there. And, you probably wonder, okay, well, why, what's going on? Is it the longshoremen that are just kind of taking their time, just offloading things? And is there any sense of urgency, or is there, what's driving people to kind of get things done? And I think, the pandemic has kind of, made people want more accountability on a lot of these types of things in the global supply chain. Why is there a problem? Where's the bottleneck, as Rob was talking about, and what can we do to resolve it? So, that visibility and transparency has helped in terms of accountability with moving things around the globe. So that's a big aspect that is we just want to kind of know if there's a problem, why, and what's going to get done with it. And AIS has definitely been an underpinning for that.
Thank you so much. That was really, really insightful. In the interest of time, and we could continue talking about this in particular, because I think this is incredibly topical. We'll move on to the Q&A section, but for the time being, thank you so much for all your insight on these questions. We've received a lot of questions, but I do have to keep it to two, I think, we should be able to get to. The first question, I will open this up to everyone, so please chip in as you see fit. How can we make sure AIS keeps evolving and remains a powerful and useful tool? And what actions should be taken?
I think it's already a powerful and useful tool, and it's established with a lot of dependencies on it, both as a safety tool as its primary function and as a monitoring tool. The plans for AIS are to go beyond AIS with the DDES proposals which are out there, which are still in the early days. They will allow AIS to remain as a core safety message, but the safety monitoring messaging system, but the messaging that comes with that in its next iteration will allow the kind of the monitoring based around AIS, the application, the exchange of information, almost an IoT type solution to be run alongside AIS as well. So I think there is already plans to evolve it in a way that makes sense. It keeps the core of AIS as is and allows additional kind of application functions to run alongside AIS, but in an expanded protocol using different radio channels and frequencies, so that AIS is not bottlenecked by other messages which kind of are taking up bandwidth. So I think there's already plans to expand it. They're probably just not well known yet because it's in discussion, it's in prototype stage, it's not yet realized. And as soon as it's realized, people will see that there will be AIS as part of DDS with other services alongside, which allow it to become part of the bigger picture, including to a degree two-way communications for applications as well as just the ship operators.
Yeah, this is, I think, pretty indicative of the evolution of the protocol itself. The AIS that we have been discussing all this time will be a subset of the VDES capabilities. So imagine what can be achieved as we move forward with that. Another aspect I would like to point out on this question is that what has been shown is that the way forward in an effective manner is more collaboration, more willingness to work together. I mean, across industries, across companies. And I think that this sense of connection is what is really boosting chances for further evolution. Given what has been discussed today, and again, from a services provider point of view, I think that there's no effective data platform if the user or the customer is not at the center of it. And this is what also creates this potential for value flywheels, where users can also fuse more data sources, provided, of course, that security and safety of this data is guaranteed. And answers the question, why should I connect my, let's say, puzzle pieces with yours? And the answer is that because this is what builds benefits eventually and can materialize into business goals. And I can only imagine what the effects of that might be, given where we are and where we might get at. It is very vital, as mentioned, and fundamental, that we're talking about an industry standard, more or less, when we talk about AIS, which is global, which is easily readable and exploitable from a, let's say, computer perspective. I think the end goal is to facilitate these decisions and to end up with digital solutions that work for the people who use them and not the other way around.
Yeah, the channel, the radio frequency congestion on AIS it's an issue.
Yep.
As there are more broadcasters that are being put out there, there's a lot more co-channel interference. I mean, AIS was not designed to be picked up from satellite. It just so happens that we can. AIS was designed for safety and collision avoidance, and but because of all of these newer applications that have come up, people are finding, it's great to, especially when you talk about fisheries monitoring or artisanal fisheries and Class B AIS, which while that's on a lower wattage, if you have a lot of these different broadcasters in one area, it pretty much just washes out the channel. So how do you cope with that? And how do you open up additional channels like what Mark was saying with VDES, and what can you do there? You can do, like he's mentioned, IoT, it's two-way messaging that can be done there then, to kind of, open up the amount of information that's being exchanged between two ships, or ship to shore, or ship to shore via satellite. So those sorts of things are going to continue to, I think, be developed. I don't think there's any slowing down or there's any reversing course. The technology is just going to continue to accelerate, but there's going to have to be consensus and agreement in terms of how all of that gets done. You know, a lot of that is done at the IALA or IMO level, right? Global regulatory level, which doesn't always move very fast. And one of the issues is that technology moves a lot faster than the regulatory side of it. And so, you know, how do we get more quicker kind of response time in terms of acceptance or even mandating, you know, some of these things, because inherently it's a safety system with a lot of other benefits. But, you know, you come down to the, you know, the human aspect and I think that's kind of where you continue to make the argument that the data remains to be free, or free in the sense of it needs to be public and not, you know, limited by any state, and it needs to, you know, continue to be allowed to be accessed.
Agreed. And I think the second question that actually kind of slots in quite well, and this is, I guess, a challenging question, given it's happened, something's happened fairly recently, and we're looking at, and we spoke about earlier, the efficiency, the transparency, the stability that AIS provides to the industry. If we were to look at the flip side of this, to what extent do you all think that spoofing and AIS data manipulation will have an impact on the analysis?
So if you're talking about the analysis that we currently do with AIS, I mean, we've all discussed this at different times, how much spoofing is out there, you know, and the majority of players are good players. The majority of operators are good operators. And several companies have been developing different ways of trying to identify good and bad reports, you know, dark vessels, spoofed vessels, anomalies. And we're all kind of slowly, I think, developing different algorithms around this to try and identify what is good and what is possibly not good. And that will continue. In terms of the effect of spoofing, I don't think it will ever be significant enough to detract from the value that people can get from the analysis as possible with the data. But it is a distinct area in its own right that needs looking into, particularly when you're looking for, you know, for bad behaviors. And it's the tools around that are getting stronger, particularly when you fuse satellite kind of observations, other kind of satellite observations, imaging, or satellite mass spec radar imaging with AIS is happening in several companies. You know, two of us here are doing that. So we're developing better tools to try and recognize and handle the spoofing, to reduce the effect of it, but also to highlight it as a separate issue that can be investigated separately. But I think it detracts from the overall good and the overall analysis, which is possible and will continue to be possible, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I mean,
I think the spoofing helps identify the bad actors. It's not good data, but there's people that will want bad data specifically because they want to look for those nefarious activities that are going on. You know, there's always going to be people that are going to, you know, pretend that they're in one place when they're really in another place for whatever reason. But the technology that is already available and going to be more widely available, that will allow that kind of, you know, secondary check or sanity check of, okay, well, this AIS message is telling me that this guy is here. Is that really true? And I think, you know, we'll be able to go back to other data points and say, well, actually, no, you know, that person isn't there. So that information is wrong. That information, that secondary, you know, check validation will be more widely available as time goes on. And it's, yeah, you know, it's in some ways bad data is good data to kind of tell you that those types of things are happening.
Absolutely. I mean, in data science, you're always going to look for the edge cases and decide what to do with them. it's just another example of that, really.
Yeah, it takes an outlier to understand what goes on with the data, and as Mark mentioned, I think this is only a small fraction, but can also be useful to understand how the quality of AIS feeds can keep improving in the process, which is a challenge for our side, both coastal and satellite providers, but also paves the ground for some additional use cases like locating foul play and so on. And also, we always have to keep in mind that this is what happens with any real data set. There will always be attempts to bypass or either for illicit behaviors or anything. So I think that the bottom line here is that we cannot sacrifice the greater good which this brings to the table for these edge cases, and through these edge cases we can also think of the opportunities for the future. So yeah, that would be my take.
I think the continued application of the data itself is important in both instances, right? To make sure it remains an important tool to make sure, we are able to detect anomalies within that data is the continued application of it. And I think, AIS really has solidified itself as something that will stay in the market. I'm sure it will evolve, and, that will be due to the recognition of bad data. So spoofing will help AIS data to evolve into an even more powerful tool.
So, there was a question I saw earlier from, I think, Phil Buckley in the question saying, that AIS will need to evolve and adapt to survive. I think we're already doing that. We're fusing AIS with many things to find the higher value, to assess the accuracy, to look at AIS itself and say what's good, what's bad. And I think what evolves will be the applications and the uses of different data sets alongside AIS that will give us far more valuable insights, at different levels.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you very much, Mark, for that. Excellent. So this has actually taken us very nicely to the end of the webinar on time. So I have successfully completed my task in all of this. So I guess first and foremost, thank you so much again to the panelists and everyone who joined. I hope the attendees found value from it, and I certainly commend everyone in the panel for sharing their expertise and knowledge for us. Finally, just a couple of things from our end. The webinar has been recorded and will be circulated to everyone, along with a short survey. So we would ask kindly that the survey be completed, because this will help ultimately us to continue to provide quality content to our networks. So please do look out for that. And lastly, a reminder that next week we will be hosting the second webinar of the series. This will be centered around maritime analytics to understand global trade. So if you haven't registered yet, please do feel free to do so. In the meantime, thank you again to everyone. I know that you've joined from all corners of the earth, and it's good to see people say good morning and people say good night. But yeah, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your days.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. Thank you.